I have no intention of taking in Tom. Just put him in some facility or whatever.
My husband, Mark, whom I had just remarried, suddenly passed away from a heart attack, leaving me still unable to grasp the reality of it all. And his ex-wife, Sophia, shouted this to the surrounding relatives. It had only been a month since our remarriage. Left behind from this abruptly ended marital life were myself and my husband's son, Tom. Despite it being the first time in a long while that his biological mother appeared, Tom never once looked up, remaining looking down in his seat at the funeral home. Everyone seemed to be sympathetically distant towards Tom, but their attitudes shifted upon witnessing Sophia's behavior. A child of such a mother must undoubtedly inherit hopeless traits. Eventually, someone among Mark's relatives began murmuring something strange.
Who's going to take in Tom then?
How about your place? Or it's impossible for us, they selfishly said. I slowly stood up, walked over to Tom, and looked into his face. Are you okay? Do you want to go to another room?
Hey, you don't have to hold back for me. I'll just go to a facility or something.
I felt a tightening in my chest and almost unconsciously hugged Tom. I felt the cold stares of those around us. When someone audibly said, raising her dead husband's child, is she insane? My head heated up. I let go of Tom, grabbed his hand, and yelled at the distant relatives. No matter what anyone says, I will raise him properly. My fervent declaration had everyone at the funeral home looking on in disbelief. Then, a small elderly man who had been sitting in the funeral home chairs cleared his throat with a small cough, walked up to me, and peered into my eyes. This elderly man was my father, Robert, whom I hadn't seen in a long time.
Are you saying you'll raise that child alone?
Yes, I'll make sure Mark's child turns out right.
Don't be ridiculous.
Robert suddenly pulled Tom's arm, dragging him out of the funeral home. My name is Amy. My boyfriend and I, who met in college, were living together with the thought that we would get married someday. On an ordinary day, not meant as a celebration, he gave me a proposal-like phrase. It wasn't particularly fancy or romantic, but I remember being delighted by the cute little flower he gave me at that moment. He had picked a star-shaped white flower that grew wild in a corner of a nearby parking lot. It was a tiny flower called a spring star flower, and when I received it, I could faintly smell the Chinese chives, and we both laughed. The proposal didn't immediately lead to marriage, but after some time, I decided to go to the gynecologist alone. When I told my friend that I might marry my boyfriend, she asked, "Aren't you going to get tested first?" Sitting in the clean waiting room of the gynecologist's office, I noticed a mother and daughter next to me. The daughter, seemingly in her 20s, and her mother were chatting quietly. I overheard that the daughter was getting married next month. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the mother was speaking a bit loudly, and it seemed the daughter was going to have a bridal check. I had come here with the same thoughts after accepting his proposal, but I felt a bit scared, as if trembling. What if the tests today find some illness? What should I do? What should I explain to him? I wanted to ask the mother and daughter sitting next to me, smiling and chatting. Hey, if they find something, would you still marry that person you care about? The warm sunlight was illuminating the waiting room through the window. As I watched the mother and daughter leave the clinic with smiles after their consultation, it was my turn. After my examination, I left the hospital, and the sky, which had been clear until then, was now overcast, looking like it might start raining at any moment. A few weeks later, I received the results of the examination, learning that my body would have difficulty having children. Eventually, I broke up with that boyfriend. I didn't explain the reason to him. No, I didn't want to explain. I didn't want his sympathy, and frankly, I never really wanted children. Sometimes when I see families with children, I have to look away, otherwise it feels too painful, and my mood sinks. Years later, I met a man named Mark through work and found myself drawn to him. Despite having decided never to fall in love again, there was something about Mark's lonely expression that attracted me. I proposed a relationship to Mark. Sitting by the window of a cafe near my workplace, Mark and I might have been trying to read each other's minds. Eventually, Mark straightened up as if he'd made a decision and began to speak.
I actually have a history of divorce, and I have a son who lives with me.
I see. That's okay with me. And I have trouble conceiving children.
Oh,
That's why I'd like to raise your child as if he were my own. At that time, I had never met Mark's son. But if he was Mark's child, I was determined to take good care of him. Mark showed a hint of sadness in his smile, and then whispered thank you in a faint, thin voice. And that was the beginning of our relationship. Mark's ex-wife, Sophia, had apparently abandoned the housework and childcare and left home. I don't know if that was the direct cause, but I'm sure their son, Tom, must have been lonely. Despite being only 10 years old, Tom would hang out late at the station front with older friends. Mark often came home late from work and didn't have much time to spend with Tom. Soon after we started dating, I made sure to meet Tom. I didn't sugarcoat it because he was a child. I was serious about marrying Mark and told him so. From then on, I visited their home daily, preparing meals and spending time with Tom. Hamburgers, omelet, fried chicken. I cooked meals that children love and made sure Tom ate plenty. At first, Tom was a bit hesitant to eat my cooking, but he gradually opened up and showed his genuine, childlike side. Tom, do you like tonight's dinner?
Yeah, well, it's good.
I wanted to keep Tom from wandering out at night, so I started finishing my work early and always came over in the evening to cook. Mark was deeply grateful for this, and a year into our relationship, we decided to get married. Legally becoming Tom's real parent made me genuinely happy. We didn't report our marriage to our parents. It seems Mark's parents had already passed away. I wasn't on bad terms with my own parents, nor were there any special circumstances, but I hadn't seen them in years. Raised by my father after losing my mother as a child. Mike smiled and said, "If there aren't any major issues, I'd like to meet your dad someday." I hesitated a bit, but then nodded in agreement. After getting married, I tried even harder than before to cook lots of meals for Tom and do as much as a mother would. I had no role model for a mother. My father was always busy with work, and I don't have many memories of being pampered. A few young women who seemed to be employees at my father's glass factory would come by to keep me company and cook for me. The sound of glass clinking at the nearby factory would often be heard late into the night, a memory that still lingers. When I was young and visited the factory wanting to see my dad, I was scolded harshly. So I hid in the shadows of the factory, watching my father from a distance. He gazed intently at the molten glass in the dark depths of the factory. There was a tiny flower bed in a corner of the factory, like a cat's forehead, where white star-shaped flowers bloomed. I remember vividly picking just one of those white flowers and waiting at home alone. Confirming that Tom was asleep, I waited for Mark to come home and suddenly remembered my father's face. Let's go see Dad. I want to introduce him to Mark and Tom. I was curious about how he would react. As I was pulling up my father's contact on my phone, a call came in from an unknown number. I put the phone to my ear. It was cold. The voice of the woman I didn't know, the content of the call, the air around me, everything felt cold. It was news that Mark had suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I wanted to rush to the hospital immediately, but thinking of Tom, who was asleep, I hesitated. And that hesitation is something I would regret for the rest of my life. An hour after Mark was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, I was contacted again. He had passed away. I later received an explanation from the doctor that it seemed to be a heart attack. Honestly, the cause of death didn't matter to me. What I wanted to know wasn't why Mark had died. What I needed to know was how Tom and I were supposed to live from now on. No tears came when Mark died. It was all too sudden, and it didn't feel real. Without much thought, I vaguely discussed funeral arrangements with the funeral home the hospital recommended, and things proceeded mechanically. Tom probably felt the same unreality. He sat in the funeral home chair with his usual expression, looking bored at the floor. A flamboyantly dressed woman appeared, looking around, and soon a commotion started with Mark's relatives. I couldn't hear their conversation clearly, but she was Sophia, Mark's divorced ex-wife, pressing about whether there was any inheritance. While the relatives desperately explained that there was none, someone seemed to ask what would happen to Tom. Sophia caused quite a scene at the funeral.
I have no intention of taking in Tom. Just put him in some facility or whatever.
He is hurting the most. Can't you stop being so selfish?
Oh, are you Mark's new wife? I heard you just got married and then he died, right? What do you do in such a case? You have no real connection to Tom, and you feel a bond after just a month?
As I continued to glare without answering, Sophia shrugged and smirked.
You're still young, aren't you? Better make a choice you won't regret.
With that parting shot, she left the funeral home. Despite his biological mother appearing after a long time, Tom never once looked up. Everyone had shown sympathy from a distance, but the attitude changed after witnessing the ex-wife's behavior. A child of such a mother must undoubtedly have the same hopeless traits. Blood is thicker than water. There's no obligation to raise a child not related by blood. I heard such whispers from all around. Eventually, someone among Mark's relatives started saying strange things.
Who's going to take in Tom then?
How about your place? Or it's impossible for us, they selfishly said. I quickly stood up and rushed over to Tom, peering into his face. Are you okay? Want to go somewhere else?
Hey, you don't have to hold back for me. I'll just go to a facility or something.
I felt a tightness in my chest and almost unconsciously hugged Tom. I could feel the cold stares on my back. When someone loudly said, "Raising your dead husband's child, is she out of her mind?" my head heated up. I let go of Tom, grabbed his hand, and shouted at the distant relatives. No matter what anyone says, I will raise him properly.
Try to calm down. You have no such obligation. Honestly, it might be better for your future to just put him in a facility.
Shut up. I will make sure to raise him properly on my own. My fervent declaration had everyone at the funeral home looking on in disbelief. If I left Tom's side now that Mark was gone, What would become of his life? I didn't want him to feel the loneliness I felt as a child. I didn't want that for him. Then, a small elderly man seated in the funeral home chairs cleared his throat with a small cough, walked up to me, and peered into my eyes. The elderly man was my father, Robert, whom I hadn't seen in a long time.
Are you saying you'll raise that child alone?
Yes, I'll make sure Mark's child turns out right.
Don't be ridiculous. You have no idea how hard that will be.
Robert suddenly pulled Tom's arm, dragging him out of the funeral home. Unconcerned with the other stunned relatives, he faced each other in the empty parking lot just outside the funeral home. I tried to pull Tom away from my father, but despite his small stature, he pushed back with surprising strength.
You said your name was Tom, right? I'm your grandpa.
Huh? Yeah.
I'm telling you, you'd have to move, but would you come live at my place? There's a factory where I work nearby. It's a bit noisy, though.
As Tom struggled to respond to the sudden proposal, Robert turned to me with a sad look.
Amy, come to our house. Raising a child alone as a single mother would make him sad, and it would be tough on you too, so come back home with us.
After the funeral, the relatives stopped saying unnecessary things to me. It was as if they no longer wanted anything more to do with Tom and me. I'd shown bravado about raising Tom alone, but it was just a front. In reality, I was scared and anxious, and I even wished I could disappear. Tom hadn't cried since Mark passed away, and I hadn't yet felt the reality or sadness of his death. But when Robert reached out to me and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" Something that had been sealed inside my chest surged forward, and I found myself unexpectedly hugging my father and crying. It felt like Tom was watching me as I continued to cry like a child, just staring blankly. Afterward, Tom and I moved out of our apartment. Robert picked us up, and we went to my childhood home with him. The scenery from the car window felt lonely, as if moving further away from my memories with Mark. Returning to my family home, a new life began for Tom and me. From his first day at the new school, Tom seemed off. "Making friends doesn't happen overnight," I said lightly, encouraging him before sending him off to school again the next day. I started helping out at my father's glass factory. Inside, a few male artisans were making glassware while blowing glass. My job was to inspect the finished glass products. I would pick up each piece, one by one, and wipe them down with a cloth. When I was young, I was scolded for entering the dangerous factory, and I used to watch the work from outside. And now, as an adult, I was doing the work I had once watched, which felt profoundly moving. An old employee, who had cared for me as a child, happily talked about how the little girl she once knew had grown up so much. Though Robert was no longer actively making glass, he was seen chatting with what seemed to be salespeople at a small desk near the workshop. During breaks, I watched the glass blowing process. They plunged a long rod into the kiln filled with glowing orange molten glass. Wrapping just the right amount around the rod and then inflating it like a balloon is simply a spectacular process to behold. I thought I might like to try it myself, but the atmosphere in the factory wasn't one for beginners to have a glass blowing experience. It was just the artisans, fluidly shaping the glass in silence. Thinking that my father was leading these skilled craftsmen filled me with a bit of pride. At that time, I think I was trying hard to adapt to a new life. And I'm sure Tom was too. At a school PTA meeting, an overly helpful parent told me about Tom's situation at school. Apparently, the fact that Tom and I were not related by blood had already become a neighborhood rumor and was a topic of conversation among the students at his school. Hearing that at night, I started walking with heavy steps, various thoughts swirling in my mind. I had been completely unaware of this, hadn't even imagined it. I should have thought about it, but it never crossed my mind. Much of what I felt was regret, excuses, evasion, and a strong wish that Mark were here with me at such a time. When I got home, I found Tom's stuff scattered around the room. I walked down the hallway and knocked on Tom's room door. "Tom, can I talk to you for a moment?"
Don't open it.
Tom's slightly hoarse voice came back. After taking a breath, I whispered, "Sorry." "Hey, Tom, if you're okay with it, could you tell me what happened at school?" Tom didn't answer. I stood in front of the door for a while, but eventually gave up and started to prepare dinner. Day by day, my conversations with Tom diminished. It seems like Tom has completely stopped sharing any updates, perhaps because he's caught on to me forcing smiles to pry into how things are going at school. Eventually, he stopped going to school altogether and began shutting himself in his room, leading a life akin to that of a recluse. Though he would leave home in the morning with his backpack, presumably for school, it seemed he returned home after I left for work. Even at work, where I needed to concentrate, thoughts of Tom distracted me, leading to silly mistakes like dropping newly made glassware, which got me scolded often. Robert noticed my distress and offered advice with few words. But I felt unable to share my troubles with a father who had immersed himself in work and neglected me when I was young, believing he could never truly understand my current situation. However, Robert, after work, would repeatedly pull me aside to insist, "If there's anything, just talk to me." No matter how many times he said it, I couldn't bring myself to discuss it with him. Each time he urged me to consult him about anything felt like a push on my back saying, "Take care of Tom." Night after night, I pondered this until I came up with a plan. One morning, as Tom quietly ate his breakfast, I handed him a smartphone. Tom's face lit up with a rare bright expression, and I managed a small smile. I bought a smartphone with a matching design to mine. If it's hard to talk about school, you can email me. I might be able to help.
Yeah,
Tom carefully cradled the new smartphone in both hands on the table. After that, there was no contact from Tom for a while. I hadn't even had time to teach him how to use the smartphone, so it was only natural. But then, one day, I suddenly received an email. His email read something like this: "A kind guy working at the glass factory showed me how to use my smartphone, so I thought I'd email you." Gradually, though slowly, he began to share bits about school via email. As a mother, I wanted to do everything I could, but even after hearing about his school experiences, I felt powerless to help beyond sending encouraging words through emails. Perhaps it was meaningful to him, though, because after a while with the smartphone, Tom started attending school regularly again, leading a normal school life. Even as a middle schooler, he caused no major problems and attended school diligently, eventually becoming a high school student. By this time, Tom was able to talk about school events face to face without needing to email, and I was impressed by his forthrightness. On a holiday, Robert took Tom to tour the glass factory. It was near the high-temperature kilns where I had been repeatedly warned as a child to keep away from because it was dangerous. Watching Tom learn and practice making a basic glass cup, I felt immense pride and warmth in my heart. From that day, Robert began teaching Tom how to make glass on holidays and days the factory was off. Robert's glasswork was artistic. It gave a special sensation, almost as if holding the beverage directly. During the second half of his senior year in high school, Tom had no intention of going to college, and he was also hesitant about finding a job, unsure about what career he wanted, which left him floundering. Despite being repeatedly pressed by his teacher about what he was going to do, he has been unable to choose a path after graduation and has just drifted along to this point, a responsibility that I, as his parent, must also bear. While I kept Tom company practicing glassmaking during holidays, I worked on paperwork in the corner of the factory. During a break, or perhaps it was, Tom and Robert sat on pipe chairs, staring at the heated glass kiln.
In an era where glass manufacturing is moving from handcraft to machinery in most factories, is there a point in continuing handcraft?
As Tom asked Robert a question out of curiosity, Robert crossed his arms and furrowed his brow. During his adolescence, it's unclear how Tom perceived Robert, the craftsman, but Robert was seriously contemplating the weight of Tom's words.
Some say our industry is in decline, but we're still making a living, which means there's value. There are people who recognize the value in the glass I make.
Aren't you afraid of going bankrupt?
I am extremely fearful. Yes, bankruptcy is terrifying.
I approached and offered them cups of Coke. These were some of the glass cups Tom had made as practice. Robert sipped the Coke from one of Tom's cups, and his expression turned slightly sad.
The world's glass products were being mechanized when I was young. Amy was little, and I didn't have time to play with her. Every day was frightening, and I was desperate, feeling almost out of my mind with the pressure to work.
I wonder if Mom felt lonely.
Yes, probably. I hardly took care of Amy at all. The thought that I was her only dependable family member truly frightened me.
Robert looked around the factory.
My wife had just passed away when I started this company. There was no time to grieve. I needed money to raise Amy. I had to keep the company going to support the employees. I was desperate not to make my beloved daughter sad.
Dad.
Embarrassing, isn't it? I'm just a man who can only think of himself.
I hesitated, but then reached out and touched Robert's hand. His hands were terribly thin, yet large with long fingers. With these hands, he must have crafted countless glasses. I found myself kneeling in front of Robert, unknowingly cradling his hands. There was something profound being conveyed. It felt as though something was speaking to my heart. Thank you, Dad, for raising me.
Didn't you listen? I didn't do anything. I was just desperately afraid of being lost.
No, you see. I knew Dad was working desperately for my sake. While I watched my father work desperately from outside the factory, I would kill time at the entrance. The small homemade flower bed was always planted with something new each season. Once, an employee told me as a child that Robert was the one planting them. It seemed unlikely that Robert had any interest in flowers. It must have been planted for me. The flower bed, which had been planted with flowers based on the simplistic notion that all girls like flowers, now has nothing planted in it anymore. As the spring star flower bloomed from seeds carried by the wind, Tom graduated high school and got a job at the glass factory managed by Robert. Robert, who had been doing more office work, started working on the glass again. Watching him skillfully craft complex glass pieces was purely impressive, and both Tom and I looked on with respect. As time went on, Tom married a daughter from a business partner Robert had introduced. When it was suggested to build a duplex, I strongly objected, but Tom insisted he wanted to live together, so I reluctantly agreed. Tom also invited Robert to live with us.
I can't sleep unless I'm near the factory.
Robert had refused, saying that. Eventually, when a grandchild was born and Tom was busy with work, I took over caring for the baby. Walking with the baby, I would look at the factory where Tom worked.
Look, can you see? That's your father over there.
I tilted my grandchild's face slightly towards where Tom was. Without a word, just silently, my grandchild suddenly pointed to a small spring star flower blooming at our feet. Those delicate star-shaped flowers were scattered around the factory, and when I set my grandchild down, she started poking at the small flowers.
What are you doing? Be careful.
Tom, coming out of the factory, scolded in a tone that sounded angry but was joyfully watching his child. Looking beyond that smile at the small life, I thought about how I want to protect it forever.